Let's talk about what happened in Spain and Portugal. Well, it's happening still in large parts of the country. Most, though, have now seen their electricity restored after an extraordinary blackout that affected millions of people across most of the country, certainly in all the major towns and cities of Spain and Portugal, including their capitals. Meant that basically, you didn't have any electricity, you didn't have any aircon on a warm day, phones didn't work, cash points didn't work, you couldn't pay for anything, trains didn't work, traffic lights didn't work, planes were grounded, absolute chaos. First talk was it a cyber attack? Then we were told it was some unusual weather event. Or was it? Well, let's talk to Andy Mayer. He's an energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the free market think tank. Very good morning to you, Andy.
Morning, Julia.
Well, it seems to have emerged now, and again, not that the usual suspects want to talk about it, that one of the most likely causes for this energy blackout was actually net zero policies.
So with the health warning that the inquiry is not yet concluded,
Exactly, yeah.
It would be an almighty coincidence if the very thing that most of us who are sceptical of some of these policies have been talking about for years coming true has now happened. And if that's not the original cause, which might be anything from a weather event to something else like those things you mentioned, then the thing to focus on with net zero is the increased risk to the system.
Yeah.
So if I can draw you a picture, so imagine the electricity grid is rather like a hamster running on a wheel. And it's a Spanish hamster, so let's call it Juan. So Juan's running away there. It's 50 times a second he's got to run in order to keep the system from failing. So when you put solar power on that grid, what you're doing is you're feeding Juan more sunflower seeds. And if you feed him too many, there's too much sun, then he flies off the wheel and the system fails. If, on the other hand, it's dark and no seeds can be produced, then he slows down and he comes off the wheel himself. In both cases, the grid is at risk of failing.
Right.
And it's not just one hamster. It's actually Juan and his 10,000 mates running on their own wheels that have all got to be kept in sync together in order for that event to not happen. And that's the risk of net zero, that you have a lot of very complicated forms of energy being produced that are not working in the same way that they used to work with gas power and coal fire and even nuclear power, which use turbines, which create their own inertia. They turn their own wheels.
I keep reading this term inertia in it. That's not kind of how we all understand the word inertia. Like, oh, I've got no inertia, I'm just going to lie on the sofa all day and watch telly. In terms of the electricity supply, what does that mean?
So what it means is when you have a traditional gas-fired power station, which has a turbine, it turns round and it creates its own frequency. So it's creating alternating current 50 times a second for the UK grid or the European grids like Spain. And in order for things to work and not fail, that frequency has to be maintained within very narrow tolerances. Right. So about 0.5% in the case of the UK. Now, when that doesn't happen, various things kick into motion to protect equipment. So if the frequency is wrong, you can damage equipment. And if you damage equipment, you then get a cascading event where equipment further down the line gets damaged. So those relays kick off, and that's what shuts the grid down, which is what's happened in Spain.
Yeah, is it sort of like, if something goes wrong electrically, you get a surge and everything fuses, and it just turns off just to protect everything. So everything fuses in your home, but you just flick a switch and it's fine. But you can't just flick a switch for the whole of Spain and Portugal.
Yeah, so well, effectively that's what they did. They flicked the switch to stop things happening, because if they have an oscillation event, which is what the frequency failure can be called, it means that something will start in one place and then move to other places, regardless of the cause.
And then it gets worse. Okay, so first of all, we were told it may well be some sort of freak weather event, but it turns out there wasn't a freak weather event. And people think, oh, well, it was very warm. And it wasn't. It was 22 degrees, which ain't very warm by Spanish standards. And then, of course, speculation there might have been a cyber attack. Now, kind of, we've seen some massive cyber attacks on, banks, on the NHS, Waitrose. It's not Waitrose. M&S is still dealing with a cyber attack problem that they've had. But two countries being impacted, I would not put that past Russia or China or anyone. Would we even be told if it had been a cyber attack? But is my question. But now the most likely explanation does appear that actually it was net zero policies. There's over-reliance on solar power and wind power, producing more than 60% of Spain's electricity yesterday when this hit, and way more than we would ever do. I mean, although way below when Ed Miliband wants to get us to at 95% of electricity from solar and from wind. But why are authorities so wary of telling us what's going on? Because it seems to me both, the mainstream media and the authorities seem to kind of want to brush over the causes, whereas, of course, if it was climate change that was responsible, it'd be all over the news. It wouldn't just be an item on the BBC website, it would be 10 items on the BBC website.
So it's two different things. The cybersecurity and weather event theories are trigger events, so what might cause an oscillation event. The net zero thing is a system event, so it's the level of risk you increase on the system when another event, a trigger event, happens, which then causes the system to fall over. So because there is no inertia in a solar farm's output or a wind farm's output, in order to create that inertia service, you have to put other things into a net zero system. And the argument is that the Spanish have not been very thorough about doing that.
Right.
So they have giant flywheels turning uselessly in sheds somewhere in order to create the inertia that a solar farm doesn't provide. So one of the, if we go more into the net zero argument, one of the things most critics of net zero who still think that something should be done about carbon emissions think is that you need to make renewable power account for the cost of all its unintended consequences. And the non-provision of inertia services is one of those unintended consequences. Yeah. So intermittency is a problem, connection to the grid is a problem, turning at the right speed is a problem. Now, if you can make renewables account for all of that and pay for it, then you can fairly compete renewables with nuclear and gas and other things.
But we don't. And even just having the backup of the fossil fuels for when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, as is often the case in this country, though not this week, thankfully, then the costs are sky high. But, of course, you don't need a backup for fossil fuels because they're reliable. Almost like, Andy, there was a reason why we started using fossil fuels, isn't there, in the first place? Could this happen here? Because we spoke to Sandra, who's a caller, who's in Andalusia. She's lived there 15 years, and she said, they basically went pretty much 24 hours without any electricity. They had 20 euros. They were really getting very, very worried. Can't access cash, got no electricity, trying to heat some water on a gas stove to wash. It was a real worry for them. But could that happen here? And especially if it happened here, in the dead of winter, what would we do?
So, short answer, yes, it could happen. And the NISO, who look after security on the grid, was sufficiently worried about this. They produced a report about it in May 2024 and talked about the ways that they currently act to tackle oscillation events. Well worth a read. One of the things that will make this risk much higher is if we push towards the 2030 zero carbon grid plan that the government is currently
didn't they take
on.
it down to 95%, just quietly? Manifesto said 100%, let's take it down.
It's an irrelevant difference.
Yeah.
The simple problem is this: unless they have built into those plans to accelerate net zero proper security measures to account for a similar event happening here, the risk of that event happening is going up and up and up with every new addition to the grid.
I don't want it to happen, but I'm kind of the view that we're going to have to go to the blackout situation at some point for people to get sort of real and understand. And the media, I think the media class in this country is just, they were appalling on things like lockdown as well. They've been appalling on the trans issue, and they're appalling on the net zero issue, and actually not asking the right questions. So just, I don't mean to share my opinions, but just try some facts at some point. But for people to actually ask some of the right questions and say, look, is this actually a good idea? And I think once we have blackouts, and I think it's a matter of when, not if, they might actually start doing that. But is it just only a matter of time?
Well, I guess the analogy to use is the one that the climate doomsters use, which is that of the boiled frog. Each additional solar farm on the grid isn't necessarily going to cause the problem, but the aggregation of all of them together puts us in a very dangerous situation.
Right. Okay.
That's what we need to think about.
We've had more talk of hamsters and frogs than I expected for this conversation. Very much appreciate Andy Mayer, energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs.